Welcome back to the Win with Dice podcast, a podcast featuring members of the Win with Dice team. I'm Calvin, and I'm joined here by Ramon.
Hey guys, welcome to the Win with Dice podcast. Podcast all about tabletop RPGs, running them, playing them. Calvin and I are DMs. We play in a bunch of games. We try and share what we learned from running the games, playing in games, and so you guys can learn a thing or two and feel like you can take the dive into the other side of the screen and take up DMing for your gaming group, as well as, listen to our stories and steal any ideas you want for your games. I mean, that's what we do, so we want that for you guys too.
Yeah, that's essentially the premise of the podcast. Hopefully you come out of this with an interest in running your own game. If there is a particular thing that you feel is stopping you from running your own tabletop RPG game, be sure to hit us up with a comment on YouTube or a message on Twitter or on Facebook or over on our website, winwithdice.ca, where we have a message box where you can shout us out if you have something you want to talk about, or you can go there to just check out any cool stuff that hasn't been posted anywhere else, like some unique artwork for our games. We have some pixel art from previous Starfinder games. We have some art of our Lancer game characters, so be sure to go there and check those things out if you're interested in those kinds of games.
Yeah.
So we've got a few things we can talk about this week. I have some Starfinder stuff I'd like to talk about, and then we can get into some other, topics of discussion, some that we've got from Twitter from people who send us some things they are interested in hearing our opinions on. So before we get to all of that, first off, I want to say, Happy New Year and everything. First episode of the year, So hopefully it's a good one.
Yeah, man, it's 2022, baby. We did it.
Yeah, we made it.
We made one more year down. It's always good that we made another year. But yeah, I hope you are having a good few days into the new year.
Yeah, it's gonna be really exciting when we get to the second year of this podcast, so looking forward to that. But of course, we have to get into the most important part of the show, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week.
Yes, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week, brought to you by Ramon, who stole this from Calvin. Alright guys, you ever wanted to play a game so bad, but no one's ever played it before and you're the one that has to run it? And then you have to convince all your friends to be like, okay, let's not play the thing that we already know. Let's try this new cool thing. It's honestly sometimes an uphill battle, especially because, you just want to play the game. You don't want to sit there and go through character creation and all that stuff. So a way that you can go around that is just having pre-gen characters. Level 1, if you want to go a little bit deeper, if you want maybe your RPG group is more experienced with RPGs, you can make a level 3 characters or whatever, right? Just have pre-made characters ready to go, maybe with a little bit of a backstory, just so they have something to bounce off of during the narrative sections of your game. And just hand them up. Maybe make one for every type of class or type of character, and just have them at the ready. So anytime you want to download new players into the game, you could just hand them the character sheet. Be like, here, you can try this out and see if you like it, and then we can make any changes afterwards. I stole that because I think it's what you did, Calvin, for your Starfinder game.
Yeah, you do have to deal sometimes with things like if the character doesn't really maybe fit their style, or if it just happens to not be very useful in that particular one shot that you made, which I might get into as we go on. But it is a way to skip some of the more complex steps for games, because I find with every game, it's usually character creation that's the most complicated part. Because it's the most specific part. Once you get into RPing and stuff, it's just you being in the character headspace, or you using the things that are already on the sheet. Largely, it's just you using your numbers. It's creating the numbers that's sometimes the more difficult part.
It's the math, right? But also when you're explaining the game to somebody, having something to reference off of could also be very useful, right? Especially if, you're talking about what spell DCs are. Having it literally on the sheet, oh, this is your spell DC. It's already making connections to the player, so they're able to just, when it is their turn, they can know what they're doing,
Yeah, definitely. If it's something that you think you'll do long term, then you might want to invest the time in making those characters, depending on how things turn out. But definitely for a 1 or 2 part game, just putting the characters in front of people so they get a sense of oh, here's what these things do, here's what these numbers mean in the space of the game. So when I make a character myself, these are the numbers I'm going to want higher or lower or whatever.
Oh yeah, and you'd be kind of cool. I mean, you could also be, that could be a part of the game, right? Like, let's say you as a GM specifically want to see these characters go through a story, and you want your friends to play them, and it could be like Clue or something, right? You're all playing all those dudes, right? You just kind of jump into their shoes and just kind of see where it goes. I think that'd be kind of cool, depending on the system, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, there you go. That's your weekly Win with Dice weekly gym tip of the week. First one for 2022. All right, let's go.
We have to figure out how to make that name longer for this year.
Just start putting like stuff in front of it, like ultra and mega and super awesome.
Super ultra combo prefix tip of the week.
Yeah, tip of the week. Yeah, that's how we're gonna do it.
So for this week, our first episode, I did run a Starfinder one-shot recently. And I wanted to discuss that a bit, including pre-made characters and how it turned out, and maybe practicing some balancing stuff that I need to do. And realizing that I may have gotten some stuff wrong, but luckily the game still turned out well. So yeah,
That's good.
Let's hop right into this. Essentially, it was this is the same group I've been playing Pathfinder 2e with. The Crown of Dragons campaign, which I've discussed on the podcast before. If you check it out. Yeah.
My favorite one of Calvin's podcasts, or podcast. My favorite one of Calvin's campaigns that we like to discuss on the podcast.
Yeah. It's it's essentially the players are members of an adventurers guild, and they are tasked with collecting all the orbs of dragonkind to put in a single crown that can control all dragons, a crown that's referred to as the Dracoronum, because I thought I'd be clever and combine some Latin words. I've recapped the game a whole bunch of times, so if you want to check out our previous Pathfinder episodes, they're all sorted out on our site if you want to look at that tag. But this time I wanted to do something a bit different. Just because I've been really missing Starfinder, I needed an excuse to play it. And I really wanted to do some ship combat. So that is essentially what I was setting up here. Basically a one-shot that focused on a ship fight, and then maybe some ground stuff if we could get to it. So the premise was a very simple one. They were all hired to explore this mysterious fragment of an asteroid that had suddenly appeared in space. After sort of falling out of the drift, which in-game is like this interdimensional space that's used to travel faster than light. Essentially, it just like popped out of nowhere into real space. And there was a scouting party that had found some precious alloy on it, some unobtainium, that kind of thing. But they were only able to report that information and little else because they disappeared somehow. So this crew was hired to investigate that asteroid. And we kind of started with, when we started playing this, something I was kind of struggling with was how much information to give people up front versus as you were playing. Because I gave them this one particular guide to Starfinder Starship Combat, and admittedly, it does look complicated at first, especially that PDF that I gave them. Because it lists everything that every class can do, and at every part of the turn. Like, the way Starfinder Starship Combat works, I don't want to get too in-depth into it, because I'm just using this for discussion topic. But it's like, every round of combat is broken into certain phases, and depending on your role on the ship, like captain, gunner, pilot, etc., you can do different things at certain phases, right? So, that lists, like, all the phases, everything you can do in the phase, who can act in what phase. It has everything, so immediately it looks overwhelming. So what my struggle is like, do I explain how everything works now, or do I do it like phase by phase? And I ended up doing a bit of a combination of the two. I kind of explained like the basics of like, here's each step in a round, here's the roles you can choose. I wrote a little thing, like a little blurb paragraphs about like what each role was and what was the major skill for it. Just to give a better sense of like, because again, these were pre-gen characters, so they would have certain stats. So it's just like, if you're like the captain, then you would need like high charisma. So someone whose character has high charisma would more likely be the captain. They know like that's something their character would excel at. And then I was trying to simplify it down, so it would be like, you don't have to worry about what every role can do, just worry about what your character can fit into, and then as we go on, what seems necessary for the ship. Because some people would have to like jump around to either like deal with shields or deal with captain stuff and whatever. I guess we could talk about the pre-gens a bit. They are the Starfinder iconic characters, if you're familiar with them. Whoever in the fan base happens to be familiar with them out there. Just their level 1 versions. Some of them worked out pretty well. One of them was really like focused on magic and ended up not being as effective, unfortunately. And also just some unfortunate roles. But for the most part, they kind of like functioned as I needed them to, which is just like a character that people can hop into. They didn't necessarily need to use like their names and backgrounds and everything, but they existed there just in case.
Yeah. Just like a stat block that you can just easily, like, use, right?
Yeah.
And you can put your own flavor around it. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if we were to make this a longer term thing, we would definitely get more in depth into that, especially with things like, because Starfinder has a theme as part of your character creation, and that's like your character's background. So it affects one of their ability scores, but for mostly, it also gives you a certain area of knowledge that you're aware of, like underworld contacts or mercenary stuff or like plants or whatever.
I'm the plant guy. It's pretty good.
So yeah, it does sort of inform your character a bit. But yeah, it was just it was easier to onboard people with that, and there were some classes that I like wasn't very familiar with, but at the same time, we didn't really do any ground combat, so it wasn't too much of an issue to deal with that. But again, like I was just saying, here's the basics of how this works, and then when we get into it, we'll get into it. So then we went on to the introduction of the ship combat, which was as they're approaching this asteroid fragment. Another ship appeared out of the ether. It's like a black ship with like red lines and stuff. I noticed like every evil spaceship kind of looks the same. It's like dark colors with red highlights. I think I used
generic bad guy with sharp ends for some reason.
Yeah, all those sorts of sharp parts. I think I used the same kind of ship description for our recorded game way back when. But essentially there was a ship, and the captain of this ship was a vampire lady by the name of Jinnith Enzo. Okay. I did not go into detail about how vampires work in space. But essentially she was like there to claim the asteroid for herself because she knew something important was on it, especially if someone was being paid to recover it. It was sort of the but thou must kind of thing. Like, you could walk away from here, but we all know why we're here. We're all here to do space combat, so here's someone in your way.
Yeah.
And then we kind of got into it. And so we would get into, like, the first part of Starship Combat is everybody chooses, like, what part of the ship they're going to go to based on what skills or abilities they have. So they would decide all that, and then we'd go back and forth. People, like, buff their ship and then decide where to move and then decide what weapon to shoot and then repeat and so on and on and on and on. The thing is, though, it's been a while since I did that. So while I had some of the basics in mind, there were certain things like for example, one of the recent books, the Starship Operations Manual, it added new things for like getting crits on checks. So there's like one particular check that you could do as a pilot where you can evade, and if you succeed, you get a +2 in your AC. But a new addition is like if you critically succeed on that, you get a +4 instead. Which I was unaware of because the notes that I had were from before that book came out.
Right.
And I own the book, but I apparently forgot that. I think I mostly just read like the example ships and the manufacturers, like all the lore stuff in the book, because I didn't recall any of that at all. Fortunately, Foundry, the virtual tabletop that I use, it had that in it. So yeah.
Thanks, Foundry.
Yeah. There's a bunch more stuff I wish Foundry had as well, like making it easier to rotate the ship, because it was very, very difficult, especially for the pilot player. Just hardware-wise, it was difficult to get the ship facing the direction they wanted. It kept like spinning very wildly.
I just like imagine the images. Woo! Like...
Yeah, it was exactly what you're imagining. But it did have a lot of stuff that worked, so I'm grateful for that. It was like, because I think I've talked about Foundry before, how there's things where you could just like, instead of having to manually put abilities and feats and everything, you just click and drag them onto your sheet. With Foundry, after I had to make the ships, and it had some pre-made ships, but I made some ships for the players. But after you do that, you can just click and drag the character sheet onto the ship and add them to whatever part of the crew you want them to be on. And then it'll automatically incorporate those stats. Like, because there's some player stats that affect ship AC. It'll automatically incorporate those. Yeah, it's really...
that's so cool.
It's really good. I'm so glad I have Foundry. It makes so many things easier.
Honestly, I mean, I'm a big tabletop, I'm a big pen and paper fan, right? Like, I like having like the sheets is what I've been playing for the last 10 years or whatever. That's like where I feel the best at. Like, but like, it is super convenient to have all these cool tools. I would want to like play in person, but still have access to all these like online tools at the same time. So like, I think it's just I think that's maybe where I'm gonna do if we're gonna do in-game stuff. Just like everyone brings like a tablet or their phone or something now.
Yeah, like I love being in person. I love the feeling of that, of being able to like look directly at people when you're RPing with them, and you don't have to worry about interrupting someone. You can worry about that a lot less. But there's a lot of great functionality to the online stuff, like Roll20 and Foundry, and I haven't used Fantasy Grounds yet, but I know they have a lot of stuff for Mutants and Masterminds. So yeah, there's a lot of great functionality there that I hope would be easier to use on mobile. I did use Foundry last time I played in person, but it was essentially what I ended up having to do was like leave my computer at home on with myself logged in, so the server would stay up, and then like log in from a laptop at my friend's place.
Nice.
Which, I mean, it worked.
Good thinking.
So what I do want to talk about one thing that I may have sort of messed up here. Because again, like, I'm a bit out of practice, and the way NPCs work in Starfinder is they have a really great, I think it was in Alien Archive #1, which is sort of like their bestiary monster manual kind of thing. In Alien Archive #1, it has this table that makes it very quick and easy to build NPCs. It just has like, if you're making something that's at this CR, here's what their AC and defenses are. Here's some DCs for their abilities or whatever, and here's what some of their skills can be. And it's like they'll have maybe 3 skills that are stand out for them. 2 are good, so they'll get this number, and one's a master skill, so they'll get this number. And what I did for the crew of the enemy ship, the Crimson Nomad, I thought it was a pretty cool name. What I did for that ship is I just made a bunch of CR 1/2 dudes, and I just put them in the various roles. But the thing is, like, for CR 1/2, their master skill, that one skill that they're super duper good at, they get a +9 on it. Just to arbitrate, like, here's the skill they're really good at. But the enemies tend to be like glass cannons the way they're made, so they have fairly low HP. They only have 13 hit points, which is not a lot. They would be lucky to last like more than 2 rounds in Starfinder, like ground combat, right? But in ship combat, having a +9, because I just gave them +9 in piloting, because I was like, they're just some generic space crews, so here's the +9 in piloting. But that kind of unbalanced things.
That +9 is a lot, especially at first level for Starfinder. I don't even think... Like, it just seems hard. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it does. In retrospect, it does. And maybe I should have looked at the other player sheets more. Because I was just kind of thinking, like, they're only CR half. They only get 1 +9. I'll put it in this one thing. But it had a major effect on the entire ship. As it turns out, and this was something that I had to look up after, I looked it up this morning because I played the game yesterday. As it turns out, I should be using different numbers for like ship NPCs than I would for ground level NPCs, because the 9 is good for, like, I don't know, if you have something that has like a grapple ability, so it's just really good at athletics. So
yeah,
you're more likely to actually get use of that one single ability if you put the 9 into that one single good skill. So if you have like a unique looking creature and it's only CR half, so it's gonna die pretty quick, but you want to get like one use out of it, just get that 9 in there. What I should have done apparently was not take the 9 from that table, but instead it should be like it's to do with the starship's like level and the NPC, their highest ability score. So it should have been closer to like 4 or 5 than 9.
Yeah.
So admittedly, I don't know if the thing was entirely balanced. Also, I did because every time I do starship combat, I usually prefer having like a lower level opponent against the players. But then it turns out to be very easy, so I made the opponent ship like the same level as the players, but they're the pilot, like the crew of it, a lower level. So in retrospect, I guess I should have checked this out first, but I thought they had it. I mean, they had a nuclear missile on their ship. I thought they had this.
Wow, a nuke? Crazy.
A tactical nuke.
Tactical nuke. It's for tactical purposes. No, that's. I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? It's like when you're making like NPCs or bad guys, they only have a lifespan of 1 to 2 rounds, maybe, right? You know, so you're basically just gonna get maybe 1 or 2 rolls in with that character, so you want to make them count. So that's why they have like, you know, like you mentioned, that one good stat is pretty high, because a +9. I mean, like in anything, your DC at level 1 is like what, maximum like 20 you could probably have. So it's like already like a 50-50, which is bonkers. Like,
yeah,
and that's like on the high end of stuff, right? Like
yeah,
we're not talking about people who have like 14 or 13 or 10.
Yeah, exactly. It's like very specifically made to get a use out of something. Just not for piloting, apparently. So
I'm surprised that does Pathfinder have like generic starships for enemies, like that already has all of the pilots and the crew built into it? Because I think that's where it should be at. Like, I don't think that NPC ships should necessarily, like, they should come like just stock, but it's like different from the player ship. It's like, this is just, if you just have a generic crew, this is the generic version of the ship. And then let's say you're like, okay, but it has a dragon captain, and then you just put the dragon stats in instead of whatever's there.
So the way it is like the ships are built the same way, but again, the NPC stats are different. So it does, like the example ships, many of them, I think most of them, have like an example complement or example crew. And it'll have like stats for that. The thing for me though is I needed the crew to be, for other plot reasons, I needed the crew to be human, and I wanted her to be a vampire. So I couldn't just use the example because it had to be like this specific set of crew, and I wanted to have the same number of crew as I did players. So that's why I was like, I'll make a ship like this, or I think I took some ship stats. Maybe, if I'm remembering, I think I took ship stats from like a module. I don't remember which one it was. It might have been the Starfinder Society one that I've used before. But I took those ship stats and I used that, but I just replaced all the crew.
Ah, okay.
Because the ship is essentially built the same as a player ship. If the players took that ship, then they could use it the same way and then put their own stats in and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just, I think maybe if I hadn't done that, I don't know if it would have gone differently, because they did have some bad luck with some rolls. But they did start off pretty well. Because essentially, like, they started off with them facing the asteroid, and then their ship, which they named their ship Hot Wings.
Oh, okay.
I love the names this group comes up with. But their ship, and I gave them a couple options for a ship. I essentially took one from the first module that came out for the first adventure path, rather. that came out for Starfinder. I took that and I upgraded it to level 2. But I made a couple different versions. One of them had like better AC, better shields. One of them had a better weapon, higher speed, and a computer system. So they went with the latter, especially for that weapon. And I was like, that's probably fine. I don't know. And it started off fairly well. They got a couple good shots in with the nuke. They did some really severe damage. They got some critical damage in there, which is a whole thing for Starfinder. It just kind of, the tides kind of turned once they were like closer to the other enemy ship. And it got to a point where I was like, what have I done incorrectly here? And that's when I was getting to the point where I was like, maybe the skill thing is incorrect. And then I looked it up and it totally was.
Wow.
So
good thing this is a one shot.
Yeah, basically. There were some like bad luck rolls in there. But the NPCs essentially had like 4 or 5 higher in piloting than they should have at the time. Which is, I don't know. It's annoying for me because I wish I had done it correctly. But the players still had fun, so I'm hoping I didn't like ruin starships for them because I want to keep playing with starships.
I mean, you just keep putting it in front of them, and then just do it right, and they're gonna feel really impressive. They're gonna feel really good, right? They're like, "Oh, sick! That the first time we did this, we sucked, but this time, oh man, we pulled it off."
Yeah, hopefully it feels like that. I don't know. I mean, they enjoyed the game still, so I'm not too worried about it. I just got to remember like what it should be in the future.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So towards what might have been the last round, the captain of the other ship called them up again because, again, they had gotten a few good hits in with the nuclear missile. And the nuclear missile in Starfinder, it also has the ability to irradiate the ship that it hits. So as they were getting hit by these missiles, I was rolling fortitude saves for all the crewmates inside the Crimson Nomad. And they were not doing very well. Pretty much everyone except Jinnith herself was dealing with radiation sickness at that point.
Oof.
So she calls them up, and it's sort of like they were able to do some, charisma checks for discussion and stuff. Because Jinnith was in a position where, like, she could probably win this fight, but her crew is also irradiated, so it wasn't really in her best interest to continue doing this. So they offered up a deal. They could split the findings on this asteroid if they found the unobtainium they were looking for. And then at that point, my throat was hurting and it was kind of late, so I was like, okay, let me wrap this up into some sort of ending. I did have some ground combats planned, but I went into like a narrative scene where both of the ships, Hot Wings and Crimson Nomad, landed on this asteroid. They found what looked like an old mining station with some of the machines like barely functioning. Getting inside, they saw like signs of combat and more damage and stuff like that. And then they were immediately attacked by these insect-like aliens bursting out of the walls and vents and things. And that's for them to deal with later, and I'll have to adjust it because now they have a handful of other people on their side.
That's true. Are you gonna run it so like they're actually on the board?
Yeah, like I have like a combat map and everything for it.
Okay, I mean, I don't know how many NPCs you got. It's just I have the mistake of giving the players like in our Lancer stream when you guys are fighting the boat. There was too many NPCs on the map, and I had a hard time, taking up all the time that for the players. Right? It just took so long to get turns around.
That is true. I'm hoping I can avoid that because like the NPCs don't have that many like unique abilities. They just have a gun and hit points. That's like all they are.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could also just maybe have the team split up where it's like, maybe you make a couple rolls like off the side, like roll a couple of d20s, and maybe they're like, okay, some more reinforcement bugs come through, right? Because like, the other team didn't do a good job, or like maybe you could tell the players like every round like more bugs will show up, but if the other like the the Crimson bad guys or whatever they were called could hold them off, then like no more new bugs will show up, and that's maybe how you can integrate them into the combat without having them actually be on the board, because essentially it's like the same thing, right? But it's like, but you can manage the amount of NPC turns you have to deal with, like, separately. It could be less of like a actual encounter tactical thing and more like a narrative moment in between rounds. Yeah, or turns. Rounds, yes. Yeah,
definitely, that's a good point. Yeah, that's something I can look into, because I was just thinking like, I'm just gonna roll to attack and see what happens for these guys, but yeah, maybe it'll be better to get them out of the way and let the players have more of a focus.
Yeah. There you go, folks. Here's your ultra super secret second Womatai's weekly tip of the week. Instead of having friendly NPCs on the map and actually do stuff, maybe have them off to the side in like narrative space and have them like affect the encounter overall instead of actual turn by turn.
Yeah. Worry less about doing mechanic stuff and have more narrative stuff instead.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how it went. I mean, I think it went pretty, other than this one thing, I think it went pretty well. I think next time I run a ship combat, I will definitely like remember this rule. I think the best teacher is failure, because I'm not gonna forget that I shouldn't use like +9s for CR half enemies on a ship. I should use like 4 or 5 or whatever the math ends up being for what it actually should have been at the time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, also you can even extract that even further and just be like, hey, if they have this many ships, it's just 5s, or like it's this amount or whatever. Like, you don't even have to actually think about who's on the ship. You could just be like, I don't know, it's always 5, and just keep rolling, like, just so it's quicker. That's usually what I do. Don't tell my players. I just make up numbers. And no one seems to question it, so
that's fair. I wish it was. Maybe I'll redo it in a way so that it's based on the tier of the ship, so I don't have to remember like the ability score of the crew or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I think it only gets weird when you have like specific creatures like on the ship, like a dragon or something like that. Like, I popped in my head, I was like, what if a dragon had a ship? It's like, do you use dragon stats? I'm like, aren't dragon stats really strong? Like, would he be the best gunner? Like, I don't know.
There is actually, this is the one thing I remember from the Starfinder operation manual. There are ships that are like made for dragons to be part of the crew.
That's hilarious. They're so big.
Yeah.
Nice. You should do that more often. You should be like space dungeons and space dragons and just be like, here's this dragon fight, but it's just a ship.
Yeah, I mean, dragons, from their size, they would count as tiny starships, so...
Just a tiny starship. That would be so funny.
If you want to, have your ship in some laser dragon fire, why not?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, it's just like the dragon in the mech suit. That's basically what the ship is. That would be so funny.
Big Calvin, old robot dragon.
Yeah. Just make the pilot one dragon, and just like give him like, or you can make it multiples. Okay, we should look into this. This was really funny.
Yeah, I kind of want it now. So maybe that'll be the next thing I do after I finish this one shot. But yeah, I think it went well. I learned some things about the game that I should have known, but everybody had fun, and hopefully the finale is just as fun.
Yeah, cool.
Is there anything else we can say about pre-gen characters? I mean, we did kind of go over them for the tips. I don't know if there's anything else we can say about them there.
Yeah, I think they're always good to have on hand, especially if you're the local GM, and you're constantly getting voluntold to maybe run games for people, or you're always on the lookout for new players to get dunked into this hobby. You know what I mean? So it's always good to have some pre-gen characters kind of like at the ready. I know I have a couple for Pathfinder 1 that I stored away. I like 8 that I created. So that's kind of cool to have on hand. I should probably make some for Pathfinder. But Lancer, actually, because of the ComCon app, they already have like pre-gen characters. They have like 5 pre-gen characters that kind of go through like the different kind of archetypes, or I guess combat roles like artillery and like hacker and like frontliner and stuff like that already built into there. So if you're really trying to download somebody into that game, you just point them to the app, click the button, they're all set to go, right? It's literally just like one click actually.
Yeah, so if you're in a position where you want to play something or you want to thrust the game onto your players, you want to make it easier for them to get into it. Definitely look into having pre-gens. Okay. So we talked some Starfinder. Let's get into some more general TTRPG stuff. Again, if you have any particular thing you want us to talk about, hit us up at WinWithDice on Twitter or from our website, winwithdice.ca. But let's get into some topics.
Yeah. Also, if you tweeted us with a question, we'll give you a shout out, I guess. I know that a lot of this came from like Siege. I don't remember what else we have. I haven't actually had the document open in front of me.
Well, we do have one from Shaka from @Station Okua, who wanted us to talk about our favorite popular media that we've adapted into a campaign or a one-shot, or if there's any modules we've taken from other RPGs and adapted for Lancer and other games like that.
Oh, that's a good question.
I can definitely say that for Starfinder, I was weirdly heavily influenced by the Need for Speed games from 2005 to 2006.
The Need for Speed games?
Yeah, because they sort of start with you. I think it was mostly Most Wanted, the 2005 game, that was part of my inspiration, because it sort of really positions a certain person as your enemy. Essentially, you show up in a new city and someone rigs a race, and then they take your car, and then they become the best driver ever with your car that you started the game with. And in our campaign, the Renegades of the Drift game, you guys were sort of like former criminals who helped steal a ship, but then that ship was like stolen from you and you were betrayed, and that guy took the ship to become the greatest criminal smuggler ever and had his own home network of stuff. And the campaign at the time was focused on taking that guy down. It was partially inspired by that. Also partially inspired by the 2006 game, which is fairly similar. Again, but although that one's more focused on a literal betrayal instead of just some jerk dude who takes your car. So that was definitely a significant part of it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know if I mean, I've adapted a lot of the encounters and a little bit of some of the premises from the old Pathfinder Rise of the Runelords campaign, or Adventure Path. Like, I've adapted some of the encounters from there. As far as like media, I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like everything I do is like a mismatch of like all of my experiences for the most part. I definitely will a little bit of spoilers, but I've finished all of the Evangelion remakes, and that stuff has influenced a lot of my future plans for Lancer. So hold on to your hats, folks. It's gonna get kind of weird.
Yeah, I should probably read that or watch that, rather.
I mean, maybe it is pretty cool. I do like Evangelion. It was my first experience with it, but like the sci-fi giant robot genre wouldn't be the same without it. And I'm glad I was able to experience all of it, and it was super cool. And yeah,
there's definitely like future things I have ideas for because of things I watched recently. The oh gosh, I'm kicking myself for forgetting what this was. That recent anime on Netflix, the Super Crooks, which is essentially like heist story with supervillains who have superpowers, and they're like really into being villains.
Yeah.
Definitely, I've been talking about like a heist thing I want to do for Museum Masterminds, and that's had some influence on it.
For sure. I think Mass Effect has had a huge influence on the way I look at RPGs, actually. Like the idea of giving the players kind of agency on like, how do you want to tackle a problem? That's usually where I'm at with it. Like, I think for most campaigns I usually set the players up to be important and a little bit above the law.
Yeah.
So they can,
or outside of it completely.
Yeah, or they're just criminals, so they get to do whatever they want, right? Like for Inyan, you guys are elite. Everything usually goes down to your, elite group of experts or whatever, right? That go on basically impossible missions to save the world. But you usually get like a cool ship or a badge or something that you can just like flash to the local nerd NPCs, being like, "Oh, sorry, kid, we're the FBI," and they're like, "Oh, damn it,
get out of your way."
Get out of your way, right? That kind of deal. As well as like the idea that I think Mass Effect 2 specifically, where you're trying to like build up your ship or whatever, or like stuff like XCOM, where you have like a little bit of like base building to it, where like you're trying to like recruit people or like get NPCs to kind of build up your portfolio and your resources to tackle problems. Like, yeah, that's definitely where I would pull in from like other games. But like as far as like genre stuff, like it feels my brain's like this crazy melting pot of like everything I consume. I don't think there's anything that I don't put into my games. Yeah
Definitely. I think there's going to be a lot of things that just like spill in. Like for me, I'm definitely taking inspiration from the Infinity Gauntlet as a concept for my Drake Corona game, except it's a pointy hat instead of a glove. There was also the Quest of the Fateseer campaign, which is essentially the players are tasked with getting a certain character from one end of the map to the other. And that was very much inspired by Last of Us, that sort of escort quest kind of thing, where it might start a bit begrudgingly. It was like definitely the beginning of it was really inspired by that, because they were just told they had to transport something, but they weren't told what, and they don't find out it's a person until they actually get there. And then the person who hired them gets killed.
Yeah, definitely feels like the Last of Us. I think like everyone also took to Brima pretty hard.
Yeah.
So you have the protect my Emoto vibe going on for it, right? So but it's cool. It feels, but Brima's also a good example of like how she's kind of useful, actually. Brima's like mad useful. So I never feel like she's a problem, but I do feel like she's important.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm going to go on a tangent if I start talking about NPCs. But yeah, that's something that I was trying to lean into, because I think I did read or hear about this specifically about Ellie from The Last of Us from the first game. I think it was from a GDC talk about her, like how her AI worked or whatever. They wanted to make sure that she was just, useful as a companion. That she would do things that would like help out the player, whether it's like warning them of an enemy coming in or finding some useful items around the map or whatever. And that was something that I definitely wanted from Brima, because I didn't want her to be like baggage. So that's why I kind of, it was like she was also a cleric, so she could do some healing. And then what I was aiming for was like useful but fragile, if that makes sense. So like she can help out, but she can also be hurt pretty bad. And that kind of struck where I wanted it to, where the players could care about this person, not only because they're helpful, but also because they end up liking them. Which is difficult to do if they're kind of like, if they don't help at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it's like the important part about having like a protect this companion NPC.
Yeah.
Right? Where escort requests should also just be like, they're not just a burden,
I mean, there's probably ways to do it where you might start off very much not liking that NPC at first and then coming around, but I don't know if I trust myself as a GM enough to do that, so maybe one day I will.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I feel so hard to distill like my games and did I actually directly take something from it. But yeah, I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
I mean, is there anything that stands out for the Lancer game that you were running for us?
My brain's all foggy. I think like for the break-in and entering mission where you broke into Blue Horizon's facility was definitely like inspired by like heist films and stuff like that, but I can't tell you exactly what inspired me to do it. I think it was mostly just like I wanted to run the clock out on something and kind of break your way into like the bottom of a place and work your way up kind of deal.
Okay, so more of a genre influence than a specific
title. I think it's just like I think I pare down stuff so much that like it's not a specific reference, but I'll try and remember it next time and I'll give it a shout out. Yeah.
All right. So another thing we can talk about, this is something from Celeste. They sent us a message a while back. A question of how to keep your players thinking and interacting in character, especially during fights and puzzles.
Yeah, so I'm guessing it's like, how do you keep them like the verisimilitude of like being in like a fight versus like you're playing your character, you're trying to figure out it the way that your character would figure it out versus like you as the person like controlling the character, right? Like taking them out of the shoes of your character. Yeah,
I mean, I'm trying to think of maybe examples of this. I feel like it's probably easier in a fight because you're relying on something that's on your character sheet, so it is something that's inherently from your character more so than from a puzzle. Although thinking back to that one puzzle Rebecca ran for us or had for us in like the first session or so of the Adventure Academy high school game, we kind of accidentally ended up being a bit in character for that.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the group, right?
Yeah.
That group typically doesn't break character very often. Well, mostly because we're playing like our own characters. We're just playing us. But now we have the freedom to be like high school idiots, which is kind of nice. But it's like maybe I think the going through the whole like knives and spoons and forks kind of things that we discussed previously, maybe in those fights that matter, maybe give something like that the players want to, like you have like a fighter who really boasts about how he just wants to be the best. Well, make a guy on that the enemy side just call that guy out. Calling people out and is one of the best ways to get them engaged and get them being like, oh, screw this guy, I'm gonna get him. Right? That's a like goading, like actually goading your players into doing something is obvious. It's like it's a way for them to keep in the game, right? Versus like they're thinking less about like the numbers and more about like, oh, screw this guy. You know what I mean? I think sometimes like as a player you can get a little crunchy, depending on what kind of player you're. I know for me, I'm like, I play a lot of tactics games. I'm all about that grid-based, turn-based tomfoolery. So, on my off turns, I'm thinking about like the optimal thing that like maybe my other party members are gonna do, or like thinking about like positioning and like what are the enemy's options about what so I can plan ahead a little bit. But if you're that kind of player, it's sometimes it's kind of hard to take yourself, like bring yourself back into the character because you're kind of seeing it more like an overall picture. But I would say that like maybe lean into it a little bit, actually. Like maybe if the person at the table is that kind of tactical person, like give them some sort of leadership role. Like maybe as NPCs, right? Maybe like identify them as the leader or identify them as the person the tactical person, right? Give them like vindicate their thought processes, right? So they're more engaged in the game because they don't have to separate themselves so much, right? Like if you're a loud person, playing a quiet person might be hard for you, right? Same with the opposite direction. So it's like maybe lean into things that you're comfortable with, so then you're less likely to not break character, but less likely to get yourself out of the experience. For puzzles, I would say maybe give maybe hindrances or bonuses depending on like the character's background, right? Like I would think that like knowledge is something super personal. So like, and the way that people tackle problems is based on their previous things that they experienced, right? So, you know, maybe the puzzle or a trap or whatever the scenario is, because of someone's backstory, they can spark an idea, especially when things are like not like, if it's not like an actual puzzle that you just like handed your players, but maybe it's something that's like, maybe it is an actual puzzle you hand your players, but like you give like one of the players at your table, like a specific person, be like, oh yeah, by the way, because of your I don't know, your herbology degree, you can like, you know, this other piece of information I get to give you, you know, like that kind of deal.
Yeah, definitely.
So then instead, you go ahead, Calvin.
No, sorry. I was just saying, like, I was trying to think of how to make it work for like physical puzzles you give to players, because for me, I mean, that's what I would like, is if I put something from the players, it's something I want the players to figure out more so than the characters. But if I want to say in character, like, it has to be something that relates to what their character is, either some stat or some piece of their history or some other particular thing. Like, it has to be able to be a part of the solution, or at least put them on the path of a solution.
Yeah, for sure. As well as like, again, the other tips of like keeping players in character is addressing them as their character, right? You know, keeping the discussion to be less like the players are having discussion, but like the characters themselves are discussing in person, right? Like like everything is like real time in the game, right?
Right.
So, you know, using those character names, right? Maybe after they've maybe put a suggestion down, you take back control of the conversation and you give a little bit of, you know, a little bit of like a narrative flair, like maybe describe like where everyone's standing or like what they're interacting with it, right? Or like someone would be like, oh, I have an idea of this, and then you say like, okay, well, how does, you know, Macy prove this hypothesis or something like that, right? Or, you know, something like, it's just so like it turns, it's like, instead of it just being like, oh, I have the answer, being like, tell me how Macy solves the answer, right?
Yes, yeah. Like if you get to a point where like a player figures something out and like maybe it doesn't represent like what their character could do, then you now have an opportunity to let them sort of narrate how their specific character would have done this thing that they as the player did.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I guess that works as well as like an RP opportunity, those sort of conflicts between player skill and character skill.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and again, it's like if it's if you know all of your, like if you put the time in before with your players to like figure out like what, you know, that the whole spoon, forks, and knives things, where like, you know, what does your character want to do and how do they like to do it, and maybe help them solve the problems with that, right? Like if it was like a puzzle or a problem or something like that, I'll probably give Macy the opportunity to be strong or be a leader or something like that. Or like have the choice to do good or bad, right? Like these are the things that Macy lives off of, right? Versus like Rook, which would be like, you know, give him the option to kill something, right? Always solve problems with violence is a good, makes Rook feel good, right? But also like, I know that I want to challenge him, so it's just like, it's always that thing where it's like Rook always wants to be scary and a bad person, but sometimes you need to be nice, and that's kind of like, you know, how did Rook solve that problem? And then through solving those problems, your character grows a little bit, and we all kind of have a shared experience of something.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything to add to that. That's pretty much, that is exactly how I examine this problem.
I hope that helps us. But yeah.
But
cool.
I think that's mostly for like puzzles and stuff. I think again with like combat and with fights, it might be a bit easier because you're already inherently looking at those statistics. So it might also come down to you just referring to that person as their character, or encouraging them to describe their narrative actions as that character.
And don't be afraid to just stop and like monologue for some reason. I feel like a lot of fights sometimes comes down to just the numbers being thrown back and forth. But sometimes you gotta put the little quips in there, right? Like, you gotta say a couple things. You're fighting somebody, especially if, like, again, I'm a big fan of that the players are the bad guys technically. All the monsters are living here, and you're breaking into my house, so as well as the players are getting progressively more powerful, and they do leave a crazy amount of dead bodies in their wake. So having NPCs actually just vocalize how afraid they are of dying by the players helps out a lot. It makes the players feel important, but also gives a little bit more flavor and context to fights, right?
True. Yeah. It makes you seem more you want your players to feel that power. You want your players to feel like when they come across an enemy that might have given them trouble before, then when they see them again.
Could you imagine if you're like one goblin out of 50 goblins in the whole dungeon, and the players maybe they rested or something like that, but you're like one goblin just kind of checking out the place, and you see like just rooms and rooms filled with just dead bodies of all your friends, right? And then you see the adventures, you're gonna be like, oh shit, like
yeah, you're not gonna stick around.
Yeah, or at least you gotta vocalize it, like, be like, right? I think the favorite part about Halo actually is when the grunts are like, oh my god, it's the demon.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's like, because honestly, the Master Chief, like, calling the Master Chief a demon is very accurate. He is nigh unkillable to them, and there's literally thousands of dead bodies just scattered across the universe because of Master Chief. If that's not a demon, I don't know what is.
That is, this is off topic, but that is another thing you can think of when it comes to how you want your NPCs to act and react in the game world, is how powerful is that individual relative to the power of the adventuring party.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, mooks should be afraid of you, but bad guys should have the smugness of like, oh, you're beneath me, until they get their ass handed to them. That's like those like classic like one-liners and stuff that you could add in, sprinkle through your combats to make the thing feel a little bit more cinematic than just numbers go smash. Like,
yeah, like the NPC doesn't know they have a higher bonus to hit or whatever the case may be in your game, but they do feel like they're better at hitting things than those randos over there, and then the randos come back with a fireball.
Yeah, right. They obviously know what a wizard looks like, or not specifically what your class is, but they know that you cast spells because there's the clothy guy, right? Or like that guy has a big sword. Should probably stay from the pointy end of that one. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, they're very likely to assume the person with the big hammer is going to I don't know, play music or whatever.
Although it'd be pretty funny.
It would be.
I just moonlight as a fighter sometimes, but I'm really just a bard on the inside. Like,
just the barbarian.
Barbarian, nice.
Okay, so that's a couple of topics we've covered there. Again, if you have a specific thing you want to say, just hit us up on Twitter. Is probably the most likely to work, but we also got our website where you can go to, or message us on Facebook, or literally anything else. But I think that is gonna be the show for today. I just want to say a quick thanks for listening and supporting us for all this time, especially going into the new year where we have a whole lot of stuff we wanted to do. So we're excited to get to doing it.
Nice.
Of course, like with the end of every show, I do want to give some shout outs and stuff, but again, just check us out on the socials at winwithdice and winwithdice.ca. But shout outs I want to give, first off, of course, to Shaka's Field Guide to Fontanez, a Lancer setting that you can add to your campaign. It adds like a new campaign space, as well as new mech parts that you could add on to your mech. It's really interesting, really well written, and I was just looking at some of the art the other day. The Groot slang is this big snake-like thing. It really kicks ass.
Oh my God. It kicks so much ass. It's like so cool, actually.
We got a lot of good use out of it when we did that one shot, so definitely go check that out if you are a player or a GM for Lancer who wants to expand on it a bit. Speaking of Lancer, you can also check out Celeste's Lancer RPG NPC guides. those are essentially their guides for how to use and how to effectively sync up different NPC archetypes in Lancer. They go into a whole lot of detail, and they are really good if you're like a GM, like either a new GM or a GM who might be looking for some ideas or some particular, like, if you have a archetype that you like and you want to focus on, if it's in the list, you might find some new ideas for adventures with it. Also, shout out to the Replay podcast, a podcast that is sort of focused on diversity and inclusion in the gaming space. They do a lot of interviews with different people who are in like tabletop gaming or video game development, things like that. Just, sort of shining a light on those different spaces and people who are doing work in those spaces to make the communities more inclusive, which I think is a cool thing. They also had Shaka on there a while back, so be sure to check out that episode. Lastly, a shout out to the Untold Stories project, where I am there on Mondays playing Mutants and Masterminds. What did we do last week? A whole bunch of stuff. Oh no, we got teleported into the brain of the evil triple wizard.
What? What do you mean?
I mean, we were in the subconscious of a being that was made of 3 other beings. Well,
you got
technically
inceptioned. You got inceptioned into. Okay, all right. Well, go check that out, folks.
Yeah, we had to fight our way out. We all had to go through some difficult moment in our past, as well as dealing with the subconsciousness of these multiple figures. My character had to struggle a bit because he had to deal with his one love interest that got consumed into the evil magical being like a decade ago, as well as a more recent love interest who also got consumed but had stabbed him in the back just prior, so it was super awkward. But we got through that, and then I don't want to say how it ended, but we do have a really big battle coming up. By the time this episode comes out, it will have already happened, so be sure to go check it out on the Untold Stories project. And yeah, they could also just, use some extra support around now, so be sure to go check them out. But I think that's about it for the people I want to recommend. I think I got everybody. Oh, I forgot. Our stuff, our gaming streams. There's too many things going on.
Yeah.
Be sure to check out, there should be links if you're on YouTube or whatever other platform. I'll see if I can get links in there too. Be sure to check out our streamed episodes of the Lancer RPG. We have about 8 episodes of that. And also Skyrim and Outer Worlds gaming streams, which I've been doing weekly. So be sure to check out those. And I also bought Mass Effect, which I kind of want to stream like today, day of recording. So if you see an episode of that up, that's what happened.
Yes, finally, the final form of Calvin, the Master Chief, or not the Master Chief, the Shepherd.
The Shepherd.
They feel like the same character sometimes to me.
Kinda. I do have Halo as well. I think we're gonna schedule Halo in whenever I finish Outer Worlds, and I don't know where I'm gonna schedule Mass Effect in. Maybe I'll do 3 streams a week. I don't know.
Yeah, you just stream constantly. That's what's gonna happen every day. That's what it's gonna go down to.
The thing is like I want to play the game, but like I need to make it a practical thing. Otherwise, it just feels like I'm just playing a video game and I should be doing stuff.
I see. True.
So yeah, be on the lookout for that. I'll probably do it at some point because I can't resist playing this game. But other than that, I think that's going to be it for this episode.
Yeah. That was a good episode.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a whole lot of cool stuff coming for 2022, so hopefully you can stick around and check it out. And as always, the most important thing I want to leave everybody with is to remember to keep on winning with dice, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.